Have you ever stopped to think about how many times we let what is essential slip through our fingers, distracted by what seems urgent? Sometimes life deceives us. It makes us believe that success, recognition, and material achievements are enough to fill the void within us. But deep down, we know that this is not the case. There is something deeper, something that goes beyond what we can touch or measure. It is the sound of a shared laugh, the warmth of a sincere hug, the knowing look of someone who really matters. Today, we are going to talk about a man who had everything, but lost what really mattered. He chose to prioritize work, pride, and vices, until the moment when his family was no longer by his side. And then too late, he realized the weight of the choices he made. This is a story about regret, new beginnings, and the search for forgiveness. It is about what happens when we allow time to separate us from the people we love, and what we can do to try to fix it. If you've ever felt the weight of absence, or wondered how to recover something that seemed lost, this story is for you. Stay until the end. It may make you see things you never noticed before. His life was the picture of success. A big house, new cars in the garage, and a desk in his office where he spent more time than anywhere else. But behind those heavy doors and impeccably clean windows, there was something he could never see, or perhaps simply chose to ignore. He had everything many people wanted, but at the cost of something much greater: connection with the people who truly mattered. It was easy for him to justify his absences. "I'm working to make my family comfortable," he would say as he sat alone in his office until the wee hours of the morning. But the comfort he provided was wrapped in silence. The cold dinners on the table, the hugs that never came, the eyes of his children seeking attention, all of it seemed to go unnoticed by him. Maybe it was fatigue, or maybe it was something deeper, a void he tried to fill with promotions and bonuses. There were rare moments when he would stop to watch his wife and 2 children. They would laugh together, play in the yard, and for a brief moment he would feel something inside him, a tightness in his chest, as if he were missing something important. But soon that feeling would be drowned out by the sound of his cell phone ringing or the endless list of appointments. He always thought there would be time to get closer later. After all, they were his family. They would always be there. But time has a cruel way of showing that not everything is eternal. As the years passed, he began to notice small changes. His wife's smile was no longer as frequent. His children, who used to be full of questions and stories to tell, now barely took their eyes off their screens when he got home. He tried to convince himself that it was normal, that all families go through this. But deep down, he knew something was breaking. And then came that day, a day he would never forget, even though he tried his best to erase it from his memory. It was when he realized that, no matter how much he had built a material empire, the true treasure of his life was slipping through his fingers without him doing anything to hold on to it. Pride is a silent but heavy companion. It walked beside the protagonist like a shadow he could not see, but which influenced every decision he made. "I know what is best for everyone," he told himself, as he justified his selfish choices. It was not malice, or at least that was what he tried to believe. It was just conviction. The conviction that his work, his sacrifices, were more important than anything else. But the cracks began to appear. First came his youngest son's birthday. He had promised to be there, but an unexpected meeting had come up at the last minute. Just this once, he thought, as he sent a short text saying he would be late. When he finally walked through the door, it was almost midnight. The cake was untouched, the candles blown out. His son was asleep on the couch, holding a carefully wrapped gift in his hands. He stared at the scene for a few seconds, feeling something bitter rise in his throat, but he quickly pushed the discomfort away. "He'll understand when he's older," he murmured, closing the bedroom door. His wife noticed before he did. She tried to hide it, keeping everything in order, but her eyes told a different story. Sometimes she would watch him as he walked through the room, lost in thought, and she would see in him a stranger, a man who seemed to have forgotten who he really was. She wanted to confront him, to shake him into reality, but she knew that harsh words would only make him shut down even more. So she kept her feelings bottled up, letting them grow in silence. It was during a trivial fight that things really began to change. An argument over something as simple as dinner, or the lack of it, quickly escalated. He, exhausted after a long day, took his frustration out on her. "Don't you understand how hard I have to work to keep all this going?" he shouted, pointing to the house around him. She, in turn, didn't shout back. Her voice was calm but sharp as a blade. "That's not what I want. I just want you." Those words hung in the air for a moment, heavy as lead, before being swallowed by the silence that followed. That night marked the beginning of something new, or perhaps the end of something old. He pretended that nothing had changed, but in that cold bed, as he listened to his wife's controlled breathing beside him, he felt something he couldn't name. A void that no amount of professional success could ever fill. She didn't give up easily. Despite all the absences, the harsh words, and the heavy silences, she still believed in him. Not in the man he had become, but in the man she knew he could be. It was like looking at a smudged painting and seeing beyond the stains, the traces of the masterpiece he once was. She wanted to save him, or maybe she wanted to save herself and her children from the loneliness that was slowly taking over the house. One afternoon, while her children were playing in the backyard, she decided to face the silence between them. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his face bent over documents that seemed to go on forever. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm but soft. He looked up for a moment, surprised. It wasn't like her to interrupt his work, especially when he was immersed in those piles of papers. "Now?" he asked impatiently, but something in her gaze made him close his laptop. "I know you're tired," she began, choosing each word carefully. "But I feel like we're losing each other. You're here physically, but it's like you're not." The words came out in a whisper, full of pain. He stared at her for a moment, uncomfortable, as if that truth were something he'd rather avoid. "It's not easy for me either," he replied defensively. "Do you think I like being gone all day? I do it for all of us." She took a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I know you do it for love," she said, finally looking him straight in the eye. "But sometimes love needs to be there. They need you, just like I do." There was an implicit plea in those words, a desperate wish for him to understand before it was too late. But he just shook his head, mumbling something about commitments and responsibilities, as if this conversation were just another item on his to-do list. That night, she lay awake for hours, watching him sleep. He seemed so calm, so oblivious to the weight she was carrying. She wanted to shake him, to scream until he woke up to reality, but she knew it would be no use. His pride was like an insurmountable wall, and she was beginning to wonder if there was still room for her on the other side. The years passed, and their father's absence became a constant presence in the children's lives. It wasn't something they could clearly touch or name, but it was a palpable void, like an empty chair at the dinner table. The oldest, Lucas, learned early on to be the man of the house, not because anyone asked him to, but because he felt. He needed to fill the space left by his father. He helped his mother with the shopping, took care of his younger brother, and even fixed small problems around the house. But behind his mature demeanor, there was a child who longed for a hug that never came. The youngest, Pedro, dealt with the absence differently. He still sought out his father at the most unexpected moments, as if he expected him to magically appear to watch a soccer game or read a bedtime story. But when his father finally showed up, he was always distant, distracted, as if he were only there physically. "Dad, are you coming to play with me?" Pedro would ask, holding a toy car. "Later, son," was the automatic response as he typed messages on his cell phone. And the later never came. His wife tried to compensate, filling the children's days with activities, outings, and conversations about feelings. She knew that silence could be as damaging as harsh words, so she did her best to keep the house light and welcoming. But there were times when she would see her children standing in front of the door, looking out at the street, waiting for something that probably wouldn't come. At those times, she would fight the lump in her throat and try to divert their focus. "Shall we make popcorn?" she would say, forcing a smile. It worked for a while, but the shadow of absence always came back. One night, Lucas surprised everyone by saying during dinner, "I wish Daddy was like other fathers." The sentence hung in the air, heavy as lead. His mother swallowed hard, trying to find the words to respond, but it was Pedro who spoke first. "Me too," he said softly, as tears began to stream down his face. The scene was like a punch in the stomach for her. Until then, she had tried to protect her children from the pain of that reality, but now she realized that they already felt it deeply, each in their own way. She looked at the calendar on the wall, counting the days until the next time he promised to be there. But something inside her began to change that night. Maybe it was time to admit that the man she loved was not the same man who was by her side. And maybe it was time to make a difficult decision. That night changed everything. The children's words echoed in her mind for days, like a constant reminder that something needed to be done. She didn't want to be the woman who gave up, but she also couldn't continue to be the woman who sacrificed herself in silence while watching her family fall apart. It was like trying to hold water in her hands. No matter how hard she tried, everything slipped through her fingers. She began to observe his little gestures with different eyes. The way he kissed the top of his children's heads before leaving for work, without ever stopping to ask how they were. The way he said, "I love you," at the end of a phone call, almost as a formality, without ever showing it at home. Even the sound of his footsteps in the hallway at night, when he came home late and tried not to make a sound, seemed to carry the weight of a man who no longer belonged there. It was during a cold winter morning that she finally gathered her courage. He was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee while reading the news on his cell phone. She had rehearsed that conversation so many times in her mind, but now, in front of him, the words seemed stuck in her throat. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaky but firm. He looked up, surprised. "About what?" he asked, as if he didn't know. "I can't take this anymore," she blurted out, tears starting to fall before she could control them. "You're not here, and we are losing each other." He stared at her, stunned, as if her words were an unexpected blow. "But I do everything for you," he protested, standing up abruptly. "I work, I support this house." She shook her head, unable to hold back her tears. "That's not enough. They need you, I need you. And if you can't be there, maybe it's better. Maybe it's better for us to go our separate ways." The words hung in the air, heavy as a sentence. He stood there frozen as she grabbed the car keys and called the boys. "Let's go for a drive," she told her sons, avoiding looking at him. Before leaving, she took one last look at the man she had once loved so much. "I hope you understand," she murmured, before closing the door behind her. He was left alone in that large, silent house, surrounded by objects that no longer meant anything. For the first time, he felt the weight of true loneliness. But the worst was yet to come. The silence was deafening. He walked through the house, like a ghost, his footsteps echoing in the hallways that had once been filled with laughter and conversation. The dining table, once the center of family gatherings, now seemed too large, almost intimidating in its immensity. He sat there for hours, staring at the empty chairs, trying to understand how something as solid as a family could crumble so quickly. The next few days were a blur of loneliness and disbelief. He hoped she would come back, that it was all just a misunderstanding or a passing phase. But the days turned into weeks, and the house remained quiet. He began to notice details he had ignored before: the absence of his children's drawings on the fridge, the silence of the video game in Lucas's room, the absence of the smell of freshly baked cake that always hung in the air. Each small absence felt like a knife in the chest, but he still didn't know how to fix it. At night, he would lie down in the bed that had once been shared, but that now felt huge and cold. He tried to sleep, but guilt kept him awake. He replayed scenes from the life he had missed, the forgotten birthdays, the hugs he never gave, the conversations he never had. It was like watching a movie of his own life, where the protagonist was someone he barely recognized. "I did all this for them," he muttered to himself, trying to justify his choices. But the words sounded hollow, as if even he no longer believed them. It was during one of those sleepless nights that he realized something frightening. He no longer knew who he was. The man who had built a successful career, who had won awards and recognition, was a stranger to himself. He had sacrificed so much for goals that now seemed empty, and all that was left was a deep, insurmountable void. He tried to fill that space with work, with distractions, but nothing seemed to help. The house remained silent, and he remained alone. But the worst was yet to come. One day, while sorting through some papers in the office, he found something that made him freeze. It was an old notebook, a diary he had kept when his children were small. He leafed through it absent-mindedly, but soon the words began to leap off the page. Sentences like, "Today I played with Pedro in the backyard, and Lucas called me a hero today," struck him like arrows. He realized then that that version of himself, the present father, the loving husband, had once been real. And now he had to face the most painful question of all. How had he lost so much without realizing it? The years dragged by like long shadows in an evening. He continued to live in that big empty house, but now it was more of a prison than a home. The walls, once witnesses to happy times, seemed to accuse him with their silence. He tried to avoid the rooms where the memories were strongest: the boys' bedroom, the living room where they watched movies together on weekends, the kitchen where his wife sang while she cooked dinner. But no matter where he went, the memories always found him. From time to time, he would see old photos or forgotten objects that transported him to the past. A folded children's t-shirt in the closet, a crumpled drawing stuck to the refrigerator. With old magnets, a pair of small sneakers left under the bed. Each detail was a sharp knife that cut deep into his soul. He would see the smiling faces of his children, so full of life and hope, and wonder how he could have been so blind. "I had them," he would whisper, holding a photo between his trembling fingers, "and I lost them." But the deepest pain came from the memories he created in his mind. At the most unexpected moments, he would imagine what things might have been like if he had made different choices. Maybe Lucas would be here now, telling him about his early days at college. Maybe Pedro would be running around the yard, calling him to play ball. And maybe she, his wife, would be sitting next to him on the couch, laughing softly as they watched a movie. These mental images were so vivid that sometimes he swore he could hear their voices echoing through the house. But when he turned to look, all he found was the cruel emptiness of reality. He began to develop strange habits as a way of coping with his loneliness. He began sleeping on the couch in the living room because the bedroom seemed too haunted. He began eating ready-made meals in front of the TV, avoiding the table that had once been the heart of the house. Even his work, which had once been his greatest obsession, had lost its luster. He did the bare minimum, just to keep himself busy, but he no longer felt the same pride he once did. The success that had once been his greatest achievement now seemed like an illusion, a sham he had sold himself. It was during a rainy night, as he watched the raindrops run down the window, that he realized something devastating. Time does not heal all wounds. Memories do not fade with the passing of the years. They only change shape, becoming heavier, deeper. He thought about calling them, trying to explain, apologizing. But something inside him paralyzed him. The fear of being rejected, of discovering that they had moved on without him, was unbearable. So he remained there, trapped in his prison of regret and guilt. It was on a gray afternoon, as the wind blew the dry leaves outside the window, that he decided to do something he had avoided for years, to put everything he felt on paper. He knew that written words could never replace his absence, but perhaps they were a start. Perhaps they were the first bridge to reconnect the abyss he himself had created. He sat at the kitchen table with a pen in his hand and a blank sheet of paper in front of him. The words did not come easily. Each sentence seemed heavy, laden with guilt and regret. He began hesitantly, as if afraid someone might read his deepest thoughts. "Dear family," he wrote, and then stopped, staring at those two words for a long time. Did he still have the right to call them that? He took a deep breath and continued, "I know I messed up. I messed up so much. I let pride and work keep me from you. And now I realize I've lost something I can never fully get back. Every time I think about Lucas and Pedro growing up without me, I feel like I'm losing a piece of myself. And you, my dear. I've failed you in so many ways I can't even count." He paused again, his fingers tightening on the pen until his knuckles turned white. It was painful to admit, but it was also liberating, as if by putting it down on paper, he could finally face the truth. The letter went on, full of sincere apologies and promises to change. He talked about how he'd spent years trying to fill the void inside himself with empty achievements, and how he now understood that none of that mattered. "I would give everything I have to go back in time and do it differently," he wrote, his handwriting trembling. "But I know that's not possible. All I can do now is apologize and hope that somehow you'll give me a second chance." But when he reached the end, something inside him froze. He reread the words over and over, trying to find the courage to sign his name and send the letter. But fear was greater than anything else. What if they didn't want to hear it? What if it was already too late? He folded the letter carefully and put it away in a drawer, promising himself that one day he would find the courage to deliver it. That day, however, never came. The letter remained there, hidden among old receipts and unimportant papers, like a secret he couldn't bring himself to share. And so, he remained trapped in his solitude, carrying the weight of words unsaid and gestures never made. But something inside him was beginning to change. That letter, even unsaid, was a sign that he was ready to face the past, even if it meant facing difficult truths. It was on a Saturday morning, while walking through the nearest supermarket to his home, that he had the first glimpse of the world he had left behind. He was distracted, pushing the cart almost automatically, when a familiar voice caught his attention. "Is that you?" He turned slowly, and for a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. It was his wife's mother, a woman he hadn't seen in years. She looked older, of course, but her gaze still held that warm glow that had always made him feel welcome until that day. Now her eyes reflected something different, sadness mixed with disappointment. He tried to smile, but the gesture came out forced, almost painful. "Hello, Mrs. Clara," he said, his voice shaking slightly. She stared at him for a few seconds before answering, as if deciding whether or not to be polite. "How are you?" she asked without much enthusiasm. The conversation was brief, but each word echoed inside him like thunder. She talked about her grandchildren, about how Lucas was attending college and Pedro had become a talented youth soccer player. She talked about her daughter, who now lived in another city, working as a teacher and being admired by everyone around her. He listened in silence, trying to absorb every detail, but all he could feel was a deep ache in his chest. They were moving on, building lives without him. When the conversation ended, she gave him one last meaningful look. "They're fine, you know," she said, as if trying to reassure him. "But sometimes I think what it would be like if you were there." Her words hung in the air, heavy as lead. He mumbled a barely audible thank you and walked away, unable to look at her any longer. As he walked through the aisles of the supermarket, his legs felt shaky and he had to hold onto the cart to keep from falling. The impact of that encounter was devastating. He finally realized that their lives had not stopped because he had left the scene. They had moved on, finding strength where he had never been. He thought about the letter kept in the drawer, about the words he had written but never delivered. Maybe it was time to face what he had been putting off for so long. But the question that kept hammering at his mind was cruel and direct. Did they still want to hear what he had to say? The encounter with Donna Clara left him with a restlessness that would not leave him. He tried to return to his routine, but her words echoed in his mind like an endless echo. Lucas, at college. Pedro, playing soccer. His wife teaching and rebuilding her life far away from him. Each detail was like a direct blow to the heart, showing him how far he was from their reality. He began to wonder, was there still room for him in this new life they had built? It was then that he decided to do something he had never imagined. He would be able to investigate them. Not in an intrusive or obsessive way, but as an observer from a distance, looking for signs that they still existed and that they might accept him back. He started by browsing social media, hesitantly, clicking on profiles that featured familiar names. First it was Lucas. He found photos of his eldest son at academic events, surrounded by friends and professors. There was a picture of him holding a diploma, smiling proudly. He felt a pang as he realized that such an important moment had passed without him. Then it was Pedro's turn. The posts were full of youthful energy videos of soccer matches, trophies won, hugs with teammates. He saw a photo of Pedro holding up a trophy, his face beaming. But what struck him most was a comment from a friend. "You're the best player I've ever seen." He felt a mixture of pride and pain. How could he be the father of someone so talented and at the same time so disconnected from his journey? Finally, he found her profile. His wife. She looked different, more mature, but she still carried the light that had always enchanted him. There were pictures of her in class, surrounded by happy children, and others at school events, cheered on by her peers. He read the comments from former students. "You changed my life," one said. "I will never forget what you taught me," another wrote. He felt the weight of his own failures. How had she managed to be all these things while he was simply not there? But it was one particular photo that made him freeze. It was a picture of her and the boys in a park, laughing as they shared a picnic. They looked happy, complete, like a family that had never needed him to be whole. He stared at that scene for minutes on end, fighting back the tears that insisted on coming. They were fine. They were living, growing, thriving, without him. The question he had been afraid to answer began to take shape in his mind. Did he still have the right to try to get back to them? That night was one of the longest of his life. He sat in the living room, the lights off, only the glow of his phone screen illuminating his face. The images he had seen during the day were still fresh in his mind, like scenes from a movie he couldn't turn off. He asked himself over and over, was it too late? Did he even deserve to try? He thought of all the times he could have done something different. The mornings he had chosen to stay at the office instead of walking his kids to school. The nights he ignored his wife's silent pleas for attention. The moments he let his pride in work speak louder than his heart. Each memory was like a new stab, but also a reminder that he needed to act, even if it was too late. That was when he decided to make a decision. He couldn't continue living in that prison of guilt and regret. He had to try, even though he knew he might be rejected. He picked up the letter he had written years ago, the one he had never had the courage to send, and reread every word. It had seemed so sincere, so full of pain and hope. But now he realized that written words were not enough. He needed to face his mistakes face to face, look them in the eye, and ask for forgiveness in person. The next day, he began to plan his approach. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He would call Donna Clara first perhaps. Or he would show up unannounced, hoping she would see him. He mentally rehearsed what he would say. I know I messed up. I know I walked away. But I want to fix this, if you'll just give me a chance. The words sounded weak even to him, but he knew that the most important thing would be the gesture, the presence, the effort. But the fear was still there, rooted deep within him. What if they rejected him? What if it was already too late for any kind of reconciliation? He tried to push those thoughts away, telling himself that, regardless of the outcome, he had to try. For the first time in years he felt something he had long thought lost, a purpose, a reason to fight, to get out of that emptiness that consumed him. And so, with a heavy but determined heart, he picked up the phone and dialed Donna Clara's number. With each ring, his chest tightened. When she answered, he took a deep breath and said, Donna Clara, it's me. I need to talk to you." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, but then she answered, "I imagined this day would come." He swallowed hard. That sentence carried so much weight, so much meaning. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that, at least, he was taking the first step. The days after the call to Donna Clara were a whirlwind of emotions. He expected her to reject him, to tell him that it was too late for any attempt at getting closer. But to his surprise, she didn't. After a long pause in the conversation, she said something he would never forget. "They deserve to know that. You're trying." It was as if those words opened a door that he thought was permanently locked. Donna Clara suggested that he go to her house for the weekend. "I can't promise anything," she warned, with a firmness that left no room for false hope. "But maybe it's time for you to face what you left behind." He agreed, feeling both relieved and terrified. He knew that this meeting would be decisive, and that it could be the most difficult of his life. On the appointed day, he drove for hours to the city where Donna Clara now lived. Each kilometer seemed to stretch time, as if the universe wanted to test his determination. When he finally arrived at her house, his hands were shaking so much that he could barely hold the steering wheel. He took several deep breaths before ringing the doorbell, mentally repeating the words he had rehearsed so many times. When the door opened, he saw Donna Clara first. She stared at him for a moment, her eyes reflecting a mixture of skepticism and compassion. "Come in," she said simply, stepping aside. He did as she was told, feeling like a stranger in a place that had once been familiar. And then, as he walked hesitantly across the room, he heard a voice that made his heart stop. "Father?" He turned slowly, and there stood Pedro, now a tall, confident young man with the same bright eyes he remembered from his childhood. For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just stared at each other, as if trying to recognize the man and boy who had once been father and son. Finally, Pedro stepped forward, hesitant. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice thick with conflicting emotions. Before he could answer, another figure appeared in the doorway. It was Lucas, now a young adult with mature features that he barely recognized. His eyes were hard, but they also held a gleam of curiosity. "We didn't expect to see you," Lucas said, crossing his arms. The tension in the air was palpable, like a taut rope about to snap. He swallowed hard, knowing that this was the moment that would define everything. "I came because... I needed to see you," he began, his voice shaking. "I know I was wrong. I know I walked away, but I needed to apologize." The room was silent, except for the sound of the clock on the wall, marking each second like a heavy beat in his chest. He knew that this was only the first battle of a much larger war. The silence in the room was oppressive, like a storm about to explode. He could feel his children's eyes on him, loaded with unspoken questions and emotions repressed for years. Pedro was still standing in front of him, while Lucas remained leaning against the wall, his arms crossed in a defensive posture. Donna Clara watched everything from afar, sitting in an armchair, as if she were a spectator of a drama she had already foreseen. "Apologies?" Lucas finally spoke, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Do you think sorry solves everything?" The words hit him like a punch in the gut. He knew he deserved that reaction, but hearing the pain contained in his eldest son's voice was like reliving all the mistakes he had made. "I know it doesn't solve anything," he replied, trying to remain calm. "But I needed to come here, look you in the eye and tell you this. I was an absent father, and I regret it every day." Pedro, who had remained silent until then, took a step forward. "You don't even know what happened to us after you disappeared," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You weren't there when Mom got sick. You weren't there when I needed help with school. You just disappeared." Each word was a direct accusation, a cruel reminder of all the times he had chosen to be somewhere else. He lowered his head, unable to look at them. He felt small, exposed, as if all his flaws were being exposed to the light of day. But he knew he had to hear this, had to face the cold, hard truth. "I know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know I wasn't there. And I know nothing I say will change what happened. But I came here because I wanted you to know that I care. That I've always cared, even if I've never shown it." Donna Clara intervened at that moment, her voice soft but firm. "They have a right to be angry, to feel pain," she said, looking at him. "But they also have a right to hear what you have to say. Let them decide what to do with it." He nodded, swallowing hard. He knew he couldn't force them to forgive him. He could only offer his sincerity and hope for the best. The conversation went on for hours, each word heavy as lead. He heard stories he had never heard before about hard times, about overcoming obstacles, about how they had learned to move on without him. There was pain in their words, but there was also strength. And as difficult as it was, he began to realize something important. Forgiveness might not come right away, but at least he was giving them a chance to express everything they kept inside. Late that afternoon, when words began to run out and fatigue took over, Lucas looked at him and said something that made him freeze. "Let's see how this goes." It was an ambiguous sentence, full of possibilities and uncertainties. But for him, it was like a ray of light in the darkness. Asterisk. The days following that visit were a whirlwind of reflections. He knew that that conversation had been just the beginning, a first hesitant step toward the unknown. But for the first time in years, he felt something different inside himself. A sense of purpose. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was something he could build, brick by brick, with patience and effort. He began to realize that his failures weren't just about him. They were also about the people he loved and how his choices had impacted their lives. Every harsh word from Luke, every suppressed tear from Peter, was an echo of the damage he had caused. But at the same time, he saw something else: resilience. His children had grown in spite of him, not because of him. They had found strength where he had never been. It filled him with pride, but also with humility. He finally understood that being a father wasn't about being perfect. It was about being there, even in the hard times. It was during a sleepless night that he decided to do something he had been avoiding for a long time: return to the place where it all began. He drove to the old house, the one that had once been the scene of so many happy memories and so many heavy silences. He parked in front and sat there for a long time, looking at the facade illuminated by the dim light of a street lamp. The new family that lived there seemed happy. He could hear muffled laughter and the sound of a child running around the yard. That scene was like a mirror that reflected everything he had lost, but also everything he could still win back. He got out of the car and walked slowly to the gate, touching the worn wood as if he could feel the ghosts of the past. There, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter how hard it was, he would fight to be a better version of himself. Not for professional success, but for the people who really mattered. In the days that followed, he began to make small changes. He stopped working late and started taking time for himself to think, to reflect, to learn. He bought books on parenting, on relationships, on dealing with regret. He spent hours reading and writing in a journal, trying to figure out who he was and who he wanted to be. For the first time, he was facing his inner demons instead of running from them. But the most important lesson he learned came from something he didn't expect: helping others. He started attending support groups for fathers who, like him, had lost touch with their families. There, he met men and women who were carrying similar burdens as he did. As he shared his story and heard theirs, he realized he wasn't alone. And most important, he realized that there was still time to make a difference in the lives of others and in his own. Over time, he began to realize that rebuilding bridges didn't mean going back to the way things were. Life had moved on for all of them: him, his children, and his ex-wife. There was no way to erase the lost years or completely fix what had been broken. But that didn't mean there wasn't room for something new. Something different, but equally valuable. He decided to approach things gradually, respecting the boundaries his children had set. He started by sending simple, no-pressure messages. "I saw you had a great game yesterday, Pedro. I'm proud of you." Or, "I read about your college project, Lucas. Congratulations on your effort." The replies were always short, sometimes even curt, but he knew that this wasn't rejection. It was a process. They needed time to trust him again. In addition to the messages, he began to show up at important moments, not as a father demanding attention, but as someone who wanted to be present, even if from a distance. He went to Pedro's game, sitting in the stands without drawing too much attention. He watched Lucas present his work at college, applauding discreetly in the background. He didn't try to get too close, but he didn't disappear either. He was there, constant and silent, like an anchor that offered stability without suffocating. His ex-wife had also begun to notice the change. She didn't reach out directly, but there were times when they exchanged a few words, brief conversations about the boys or practical matters. He could see a mix of wariness and curiosity in her eyes. She hadn't completely forgiven him, nor had he expected her to. But there was a new dynamic between them, something that resembled mutual respect, albeit fragile. It was during one of these interactions that she said something that made him think deeply. "You're trying," she said, as they talked about Pedro's birthday, "and that's more than I expected." He smiled, but it was a sad smile, filled with gratitude and humility. He knew that her comment was a small but significant victory. It was a sign that perhaps he was on the right track. Little by little, he began to build a new form of connection with his family. It wasn't the close, intimate relationship he had lost, but it was something genuine and based on respect. And for him, that was more than he could have dreamed of just a few months ago. Each message answered, each presence noticed, was proof that it is never too late to start over, even if it is in a different way. This story invites us to reflect on our own lives. How many times have we left aside the people we love most in the name of empty goals? How many times have we allowed pride, work, or fear to distance us from those who really matter? The protagonist of this journey shows us that it is never too late to ask for forgiveness, to reconnect, and to seek a greater purpose. What about you? Have you ever stopped to think about how your choices are impacting the people around you? If you could go back in time, what would you do differently? Or better yet, what can you start doing today to ensure that tomorrow is a little better? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone special. Maybe it will inspire someone else to take the first step towards change. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Stories that move, transform, and leave a mark.